The story of the Ark begins in a moment of dramatic transition. Israel was no longer a nation of slaves groaning under Pharaoh's oppression. Through mighty acts of deliverance recorded in the book of Exodus, God brought them out of Egypt with power, judgment, and covenant promise. The Red Sea had parted. The Egyptian army had fallen. Chains were broken. Yet freedom was only the beginning. Israel had spent generations in slavery. They knew how to make bricks. They knew how to obey harsh taskmasters. They knew survival. But they did not yet know how to live as a holy nation belonging to a holy God. Deliverance from Egypt did not instantly produce spiritual maturity. They had been physically freed, but they were still learning what it meant to be spiritually formed. Now they stood in the wilderness, no temples, no cities, no infrastructure, only tents and the open sky. The God who had shaken Egypt with plagues and thunder now desired to dwell among them. That reality was both astonishing and terrifying. They had witnessed his holiness at Sinai: thunder, lightning, smoke, fire, and a trembling mountain. The experience made one truth unmistakably clear. This God was not like the idols of Egypt. He was living, powerful, and utterly holy. Israel was learning that freedom did not mean independence from God. It meant belonging to Him. At Mount Sinai, God did not merely give moral laws. He gave architectural instructions. In the book of Exodus, chapter 25, He commanded Moses to build a sanctuary so that he might dwell among his people. At the very center of that sanctuary would be the Ark of the Covenant. The instructions were precise. The ark was to be made of acacia wood, overlaid with pure gold inside and out. Its dimensions were specified down to exact measurements. Rings were to be placed at its corners. Poles were to remain in those rings permanently. A mercy seat of pure gold was to form its lid, with 2 cherubim fashioned from one piece with it. Nothing was left to human creativity. The measurements were not suggestions. They were not symbolic approximations. They were divine specifications. Nothing could be added. Nothing could be subtracted. The design was shown to Moses on the mountain, and it had to be reproduced exactly as revealed. Why such precision? Because the ark would not merely be a religious artifact. God declared that it would be the place where He would meet with His people. From above the mercy seat, between the cherubim, He would speak. The ark would become the earthly focal point of divine presence. If the design reflected human preference rather than divine instruction, the meaning would be distorted. Obedience, not innovation, was the foundation of this sacred construction. The ark was not meant to be admired as an artistic masterpiece. Its primary purpose was relational. It was to stand at the center of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting inside the most holy place. This tent, also described in the book of Exodus, was portable because Israel was still a pilgrim people. Yet even in mobility, God required a defined sacred center. The ark symbolized covenant. A covenant is more than a contract. It is a binding relationship initiated by God. Israel's identity as a nation did not come from shared geography or military strength. It came from divine promise. The ark embodied that promise. It would contain the tablets of the law, representing God's revealed will. It would serve as the throne-like footstool of the invisible King dwelling among them. By placing the ark at the center of the tabernacle, God was teaching Israel a profound lesson. His presence must remain at the center of national and spiritual life. Remove the center, and everything else loses orientation. The ark declared that Israel's survival in the wilderness would not depend on weapons or strategy, but on covenant faithfulness. Once the design was revealed, another question emerged. Who could possibly build such a sacred object? In Book of Exodus, chapter 31, God answered that question directly. He told Moses that he had called Bezalel by name. This detail is remarkable. Bezalel was not a prophet like Moses. He was not a priest like Aaron. He was not a tribal chief or military leader. He was an ordinary man among thousands. Yet God singled him out. The calling was not based on reputation or visible status. It was based on divine choice. God had already prepared him for this task. The ark would not be built through human ambition, but through God's sovereign selection. This moment expanded Israel's understanding of calling. Leadership in God's kingdom was not limited to preaching or governing. Sacred craftsmanship was also holy service. God did not merely appoint Bezalel, he empowered him. The text states that he was filled with the Spirit of God. This filling granted him wisdom, understanding, knowledge, and skill in all kinds of craftsmanship. Each of these gifts mattered. Wisdom enabled him to discern how to execute the design faithfully. Understanding allowed him to grasp the deeper purpose behind each instruction. Knowledge gave him technical awareness of materials and processes. Skill equipped his hands to shape wood and gold with precision. This was not talent developed in Egyptian workshops alone. It was spirit-enabled ability. The same Spirit who parted seas and descended in fire now guided the hands of a craftsman in the wilderness. The ark required both spiritual reverence and technical excellence. God supplied both. This filling also ensured that the project would not become a human achievement. The glory belonged to God, not to Bezalel. The Spirit's presence guaranteed that what was built in the desert would reflect heaven's pattern. There is a profound theological implication in this moment. The Spirit of God does not only anoint prophets to speak or priests to minister, he also empowers artisans to build. In many ancient cultures, craftsmanship was admired, but rarely considered sacred. In Israel's story, however, skilled labor became a vehicle of divine purpose. The making of the ark was not a secular task supporting a religious system. It was itself an act of worship. This teaches that God values obedience expressed through work. Sacredness is not confined to public leadership. It includes hidden faithfulness in precise execution. Bezalel's calling reveals that spiritual empowerment is not limited to dramatic miracles or prophetic words. It can manifest in careful measurement, steady hands, and unwavering attention to detail. The ark would stand as the visible center of Israel's worship, yet behind its gold and beauty stood a deeper truth. God not only commands holiness, he provides the spirit necessary to accomplish it. In the wilderness, a former slave nation was learning that the holy God who redeemed them also dwelled among them. Through exact instruction, covenant purpose, and spirit-empowered craftsmanship, the Ark of the Covenant emerged, not merely as a box of wood and gold, but as the throne symbol of divine presence and relational promise. The command had been given, the design had been revealed, the craftsman had been chosen and filled with the Spirit. Yet one crucial question remained. Where would the materials come from? Israel was not a wealthy empire. They were former slaves wandering in the wilderness. They had no mines, no trade routes, no infrastructure. And yet the ark required gold, pure gold, along with fine fabrics, precious stones, and durable wood. The answer reveals one of the most remarkable reversals in Scripture. Before Israel left Egypt, God instructed them to ask their Egyptian neighbors for articles of silver and gold. According to the book of Exodus, chapter 12, the Egyptians gave generously. The text even states that Israel plundered Egypt, not through violence, but through divine favor. What once symbolized oppression now became provision. The gold that would overlay the ark had once belonged to those who enslaved Israel. It had adorned the houses and temples of a powerful civilization. It may even have decorated idols. Yet in the wilderness, that same gold was melted, purified, and reshaped into something entirely different, an offering to the Lord. This transformation carries deep meaning. God did not need Egypt's wealth, yet he allowed Israel to carry it out. What had been used in a system of bondage would now be used in the service of covenant. The wealth of the oppressor became material for holy worship. The ark, therefore, was not merely constructed from desert resources. It was built from redeemed resources. The story subtly proclaims that God can reclaim what once symbolized captivity and convert it into something sacred. Alongside gold, the ark required acacia wood. Acacia was one of the few trees capable of surviving in the harsh desert climate. Its wood was dense, resistant to decay, and remarkably durable. In a region where resources were scarce, acacia represented endurance. The choice of this material was practical, but it was also symbolic. Israel was a people in formation, learning resilience in an unforgiving environment. Just as acacia wood endured the desert sun and wind, so Israel was being shaped through testing. The ark's wooden core reflected strength that does not easily rot or fracture. Acacia would form the structure, gold would cover it. The combination suggests both humanity and glory, earthly substance overlaid with divine splendor. The ark was not solid gold, it was wood covered in gold. That design choice hints at a pattern, the ordinary made extraordinary when enveloped in divine purpose. The ark would not stand alone. It belonged within the tabernacle, a sacred space, crafted with fine linen and richly colored threads. The fabrics described in the book of Exodus were blue, purple, and scarlet. These were not random colors. Purple was associated with royalty, blue evoked heaven and transcendence. Scarlet suggested sacrifice and blood. Together, they formed a tapestry of theological symbolism, kingship, divine authority, and atonement woven into the very environment where the ark would dwell. The tabernacle was not merely functional shelter, it was visual theology. Every thread reinforced the truth that Israel's God was king, holy and sovereign, yet dwelling among his covenant people. Perhaps the most astonishing detail is not the material itself, but how it was given. When Moses invited the people to contribute, they responded freely and abundantly. Men and women brought gold jewelry, fine linen, acacia wood, and precious stones. The response was so overwhelming that the craftsmen eventually reported that they had more than enough. Moses had to command the people to stop giving. This moment stands in stark contrast to their slavery. In Egypt, they labored under compulsion. In the wilderness, they gave voluntarily. The ark was not funded through taxation or forced tribute. It was built through willing hearts. The people who once worked unwillingly for Pharaoh now worked willingly for their God. Freedom expressed itself through generosity. Thus, the ark became not only a symbol of divine presence, but also a testimony to transformed hearts. With materials gathered and craftsmen empowered, the construction began. Every detail followed the revealed pattern. Precision mattered because the ark represented the meeting point between heaven and earth. The ark's frame was cut from acacia wood according to exact measurements. There was no room for improvisation. The dimensions had been specified by God. Each board had to be shaped carefully. Any deviation would compromise the design. The process demanded discipline. Craftsmanship in this context was obedience made visible. The wooden core provided structure and stability. It ensured that the ark could endure transportation through the wilderness. Strength beneath beauty. This was essential. Once the frame was constructed, it was overlaid with pure gold, inside and outside. This detail is striking. The gold was not merely for external display. Even the unseen interior was covered. The message is unmistakable. Holiness is not superficial. The ark's exterior radiated splendor, but its hidden interior reflected the same purity. There was no compromise between appearance and reality. The covering of gold inside and out symbolized complete consecration. What represented God's presence could not contain corruption, whether visible or concealed. This dual covering speaks to integrity. The sacred cannot be merely decorative, it must be true in every dimension. The ark was not to be stationary forever. It was designed for movement because Israel was a pilgrim people. 4 gold rings were attached to its corners. Through these rings, acacia poles overlaid with gold were inserted. The poles were never to be removed. According to Book of Numbers, chapter 4, the ark was not to be touched directly. Only the designated Levites could carry it, and even they were forbidden to touch the holy object itself. The poles ensured distance. The reason was not superstition, it was holiness. The ark symbolized the throne of the invisible God. Casual contact would profane what was sacred. Later narratives would confirm the seriousness of this command. The holiness of God was not symbolic, it was real, and it demanded reverence. Thus, the rings and poles were not mere logistical features. They embodied theological truth. God is near, yet not to be handled casually. Above the ark rested its most extraordinary feature, the mercy seat. In Book of Exodus 25:22, God declared that he would meet with Moses above this cover, between 2 cherubim. The mercy seat was crafted from a single piece of pure gold. The 2 cherubim were not separate attachments. They were hammered out of the same piece. Their wings stretched upward and inward, overshadowing the cover. This unified. Construction mattered. The throne and its guardians were inseparable. The design communicated majesty and mystery. Theologically, the mercy seat was the place where justice and mercy met. Beneath it lay the tablets of the law, the standard of divine righteousness. Above it was the cover where atoning blood would later be sprinkled. The law demanded judgment. The mercy seat provided covering. It foreshadowed atonement. On the Day of Atonement, blood would be applied there, symbolizing that sin was not ignored, but covered through sacrifice. The ark thus held together 2 realities, God's unwavering justice and his gracious provision. In the wilderness, surrounded by tents and sand, Israel possessed a golden symbol of covenant reality. The ark was more than wood and gold. It embodied redemption, holiness, provision, authority, and mercy. Every material, every measurement, every feature proclaimed that the God who delivered Israel from Egypt was both transcendent and present, dwelling among his people in covenant faithfulness. The ark was not an empty symbol. It was not merely a throne-like structure representing divine presence. Within it were placed sacred testimonies, physical reminders of covenant history. According to Epistle to the Hebrews chapter 9, 3 specific items were associated with the ark: the tablets of the law, Aaron's rod that budded, and a golden jar of manna. Each object carried theological weight. Together, they formed a narrative of authority, rebellion, provision, and grace. At the heart of the ark lay the stone tablets inscribed by the finger of God. These were not human reflections about morality. They were divine revelation. The commandments recorded in the book of Exodus were written by God Himself, signifying their ultimate authority. The tablets represented covenant governance. Israel was not bound together by ethnicity alone, nor by territory, nor by political systems. They were bound by divine law. The commandments defined righteousness, justice, worship, family order, and social responsibility. They established God as king. Placing the tablets inside the ark symbolized that God's rule was central. The ark functioned as a throne footstool of the invisible king, and the law within it represented the constitution of his kingdom. Israel's morality was not negotiable. It flowed from covenant relationship. The law was also a mirror. It revealed God's holiness and exposed human frailty. Beneath the mercy seat, the tablets testified that God's standards were unchanging. Above them, atonement would later be applied. Justice and mercy were structurally inseparable. The second object told a different story, one of rebellion and divine confirmation. In Book of Numbers, chapter 17, a dispute arose regarding priestly authority. Certain leaders challenged Aaron's role, questioning whether he had truly been chosen by God. In response, God commanded that each tribal leader bring a staff with the leader's name inscribed upon it. Aaron's name was written on the staff representing Levi. These rods were placed before the Lord overnight. By morning, only Aaron's rod had sprouted buds, blossomed, and produced almonds. Life emerged from dead wood. The budding rod was then preserved as a testimony against rebellion. Placed inside the ark, it became a permanent reminder that priestly authority was not self-appointed. It was divinely ordained. The symbolism is profound. A dry staff, cut off from its roots, cannot produce life. Yet God caused fruit to appear. The rod testified that true spiritual leadership does not originate in human ambition. It is validated by divine power. Life from what was lifeless became a sign that God Himself sustains His chosen servants. Inside the ark, alongside the law, the rod declared that God not only governs, but appoints mediators to serve before Him. The third object reached back to Israel's earliest wilderness days. In Book of Exodus, chapter 16, when the people faced hunger, God rained bread from heaven. Each morning they gathered manna, just enough for the day. If they attempted to hoard it, it spoiled overnight. Yet one jar of manna was preserved before the Lord as a testimony. Placed within the ark, the golden jar represented divine provision. Israel survived not by agriculture or trade, but by daily dependence. The manna reminded future generations that God sustains His people even in barren places. The contrast is striking. Outside the ark, manna decayed. Inside, it was preserved. What normally spoiled was kept intact in the presence of God. The message was clear. What God ordains and consecrates endures. Together, These three items formed a narrative arc. The law revealed God's righteous standard. The rod demonstrated his chosen priesthood. The manna testified to his faithful provision. Governance, mediation, and sustenance, all centered in covenant presence. The ark was not merely symbolic storage, it was the meeting point between heaven and earth. In Book of Numbers 7:89, a remarkable statement appears. When Moses entered the tent of meeting to speak with the Lord, he heard the voice speaking to him from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubim. The imagery is breathtaking. There was no carved idol seated between the cherubim. There was no visible figure. Yet the space above the ark functioned as a throne room. From that unseen locus, God spoke. Moses did not require intermediaries. He did not consult omens or rituals. He entered and he heard. The covenant was relational and communicative. Israel did not worship a mute deity carved from stone. They followed a living God who revealed his will. This distinguishes Israel's faith from surrounding cultures. In many ancient societies, priests interpreted the will of silent idols, but at the ark, revelation flowed directly. The voice of God-shaped law guided journeys, corrected rebellion, and directed leadership. Theologically, the ark embodied divine nearness without diminishing divine transcendence. God was present yet unseen, accessible yet holy, speaking yet sovereign. The ark was not confined to stillness. It traveled with Israel. It witnessed their fears, victories, failures, and triumphs. Whenever the camp moved, the ark had to be carefully covered. The priests shielded it from sight before the Levites carried it. According to Book of Numbers, chapter 4, only designated Levites could bear it, using the poles. Direct contact was forbidden. Holiness required boundaries. The covering reminded Israel that familiarity must never lead to irreverence. Though God dwelled among them, he was not common. Movement did not lessen sanctity. Centuries later, during the reign of David, the seriousness of this command was tragically illustrated. In 2nd Book of Samuel chapter 6, the ark was being transported on a cart. When the oxen stumbled, a man named Uzzah reached out to steady it. Instantly, he fell dead. The reaction shocks modern readers. His intentions seemed good, yet the method violated divine instruction. The ark was never meant to be carried on a cart, nor touched directly. The event underscores a sobering truth. Sincerity does not replace obedience. The holiness of God cannot be managed by human instinct. Reverence is not optional. The ark also accompanied Israel into battle. When it went before them, it symbolized that God himself led the way. In certain moments of covenant faithfulness, enemies fled and fortresses collapsed. The ark did not function as a magical charm. Its presence did not guarantee victory apart from obedience. But when Israel aligned with covenant purpose, the ark represented divine leadership. The message was unmistakable. The true power of Israel did not reside in military strength, but in the presence of their God. Thus, through wilderness wanderings and battlefield encounters, the ark stood as a constant reminder of covenant reality. It held testimony within. It radiated holiness without. It spoke revelation. It demanded reverence. It preceded armies. It exposed irreverence. And in every context, it declared the same truth. The God who redeemed Israel was not distant. He dwelled among them, holy, sovereign, and faithful. As we move from the ark's construction, contents, mobility, and role in revelation and battle, we arrive at the most sacred moment in Israel's calendar, the Day of Atonement. Everything about the ark, its gold covering, its hidden law, its overshadowing cherubim, reached theological intensity on this single day each year. In Book of Leviticus, chapter 16, detailed instructions are given for this solemn event. Only once a year, the high priest could enter the most holy place, the inner chamber where the ark rested behind the veil. No ordinary priest could pass that boundary. No casual worshiper could step inside. Even the high priest did not enter freely or confidently. He entered with fear, preparation, and blood. Before approaching the ark, he offered sacrifices for himself and for the people. He bathed, dressed in sacred garments, and carried the blood of the offering inside the veil. The chamber would have been dark, except for the faint glow reflecting off gold surfaces. Before him stood the ark, the covenant chest containing the law, the standard that Israel had repeatedly broken. And then came the central act. He sprinkled blood upon the mercy seat. The mercy seat, crafted from one piece of pure gold, overshadowed by the cherubim, was the symbolic throne of divine presence. Beneath it lay the tablets of the law, testimony of righteousness and justice. Above it, blood was applied. This act declared something profound. Sin was not ignored. The law still stood. Justice was not erased. But atonement provided covering. The Hebrew concept of atonement carries the idea of covering or cleansing. The blood symbolized life, given in place of life. It testified that transgression carried consequence, yet God Himself provided the means for reconciliation. Justice was not dismissed, but it was satisfied through sacrifice. The ark thus became the intersection of holiness and mercy. The very place that contained the record of covenant obligation also became the place where covenant failure was covered. Without blood, the law would condemn. With blood applied to the mercy seat, mercy triumphed without compromising righteousness. This annual ritual taught Israel that holiness is not negotiable and forgiveness is not cheap. Atonement required cost, yet the cost was ordained by God Himself. In this moment, the ark was not merely a symbol of divine presence, it was the theater of redemption. When we step back and consider every component of the ark, a layered symbolism emerges, structural, historical, and theological. The acacia wood represented humanity. It was earthly, tangible, formed from the desert, strong yet natural. The gold overlay symbolized divine glory and purity. The ark was not pure gold, it was wood covered in gold, human substance enveloped in divine radiance, strength clothed in holiness. Inside rested the tablets of the law, the Word of God. They represented moral authority, covenant structure, and divine governance. Israel was not ruled by impulse or tradition, but by revealed truth. Aaron's budding rod symbolized chosen authority. Leadership in Israel was not seized, it was granted. Life emerging from dead wood testified that God validates His servants with power beyond human capacity. The jar of manna represented provision. God sustains what He calls. Daily bread in the wilderness reminded Israel that survival depended not on environment, but on divine faithfulness. Above all stood the mercy seat, representing mercy without the abandonment of justice. It was the covering over the law. It was the place where blood was applied. It declared that holiness and compassion coexist in God's character. The ark, therefore, functioned as a microcosm of covenant theology. Humanity, wood, divinity, gold, revelation, law, authority, rod, provision, manna, Atonement, mercy seat. Every detail communicated that the God of Israel is holy, sovereign, provider, judge, and redeemer. After centuries of centrality, through wilderness wanderings, conquest, the era of judges, and the monarchy, the ark eventually disappeared from the biblical narrative. Following the Babylonian conquest of Jerusalem in 586 BC, the ark is no longer explicitly mentioned. Since that time, it has been absent from confirmed history for approximately 2,600 years. Many theories have emerged. Some claim it was hidden before the Babylonian invasion. Others suggest it was destroyed, carried away, or secretly preserved. Legends persist in various cultures. Explorers have searched. Archaeologists have speculated. But no verified archaeological evidence has conclusively identified the ark's present location. Its absence raises a deeper question. What if it were discovered today? Would modern humanity respond with reverence or curiosity? Would it become a museum artifact, a political symbol, or a spiritual awakening? The ark was never meant to be a trophy of history. It was a vessel of holiness. Its power was not technological, it was relational and covenantal. The more searching question is not where is the ark, but are we prepared for the holiness it represented? The ark testified that God is not passive. He speaks, he commands, he judges, he forgives. He dwells among his people, but on his terms. Perhaps its disappearance is itself instructive. The covenant was never ultimately about a golden box. It was about the presence of God. The ark pointed beyond itself to divine holiness and redemptive mercy that transcend physical location. If this deep exploration of covenant, holiness, and redemption has helped you understand Scripture in a richer way, consider subscribing and following the channel. There is much more to uncover, from ancient texts to timeless theological truths. Stay connected so you don't miss future teachings that continue to illuminate the profound story of faith woven through history.